HELENE CHADWICK was a big star of the 19-teens and on into the 1920s, but when the Talkies hit, she starred in just 2 Talkies before slipping into uncredited character parts. Why? Join me as I investigate. A quick anecdote before I begin. I've been fascinated with HELENE CHADWICK ever since I was a little kid. My grandfather owned Clarence Sinclair Bull's book, The Faces of Hollywood, in which he shared all of the photographs of the various Goldwyn and later MGM stars that he took between the 1920s and 1950s. His photograph of Helene in an elegant gown and a headdress was one of my favorite photographs to look at every time I saw that book. HELENE CHADWICK was born in 1897 in Chadwicks, New York, a town named for her great-grandfather. Her parents were George and Marie Chadwick. George was in business, his family owned a silk mill, and Marie was a singer and an actress. There's not a lot of information out there about her childhood, but we do know that her father sadly passed away in 1907, and that the Chadwick family lost most of its fortune in the early 1900s due to the mill closing. We also know that sometime around the age of 17 or 18, either she went to school in New York or visited New York with her mother, and was asked to pose for several paintings, eventually gaining some fame as an artist model. In 1927, Motion Picture Magazine stated that as a model, Helene was known as the girl with the perfect face, and that artists miss having her as a model. Another source I saw indicates that she went to school in New York City, like I said, but was even after that discovered as a model. Either way, she was a model when, in 1916, a movie producer saw one of her paintings and signed her to star in The Challenge at Astra, a subsidiary of Pathé, as the leading lady to Montague Love. She won rave reviews from Motion Picture News for her work in that film, who said, "HELENE CHADWICK took the heroine's role and scored a decided success in it. She had never before appeared on the stage or screen, but she has personality, ability, vivaciousness, and earnestness." Helene was a hit and was signed to Astra Pathé, where she made several films at their Fort Lee, New Jersey studios over the next several years. Interestingly enough, Helene moved between supporting and leading roles at Astra for the next 3 years. She starred with Antonio Moreno in both The Angel Factory in 1917 and The Nalaka in 1918, but didn't have a star vehicle at Pathé on caliber to her debut film until 1919's Caleb Piper's Girl. Also interesting, Motion Picture Magazine published an item about her in connection with that film that said that she was a Pathé star, but following this film's release, Helene left Pathé and began working at Paramount briefly. Also, sometime between 1918 and 1919, Helene had moved from Pathé's Fort Lee studios to their Hollywood studios. At Paramount, Helene co-starred with Marguerite Clark in Girls and Bryant Washburn in A Very Good Young Man, both in 1919. In 1920, she signed with Goldwyn and saw her greatest fame and success as a motion picture star. She had several hit films over the next 4 years and enjoyed a considerable amount of press, including an article in Motion Picture Magazine in 1920 that profiled her romantic life. She had recently been seen around town with young director William Wellman, who would become her husband between 1921 and 1923. She had another piece in the same magazine in which she gave a brief family history and was quite honest about the Chadwick family losing its fortune and her needing to become an actress to support her mother. At Goldwyn, Helene had several critical and commercial hits between 1920 and the end of 1923. Highlights included Godless Men in 1920, which fortunately survives and saw Helene give a very good performance opposite John Bowers and Russell Simpson. Scratch My Back, also in 1920, an interesting film, which got her rave reviews from Variety. Dangerous Curve Ahead with Richard Dix, that got her a glowing notice in Exhibitor's Herald. Brothers Under the Skin in 1922, which one magazine called the best work of her career. And Gimme in 1923, which got her good reviews for her foray into comedy. Unfortunately, almost all of Helene's work at Pathé, Goldwyn, and even afterward at other studios is lost. In fact, only about 10 of her silent films survive out of the 60 plus that she made between 1916 and 1928, a real tragedy. Following Reno, which was released in 1923 and got her good reviews, but mixed ones overall as a film, Helene left Goldwyn. According to Motion Picture Magazine, she left Goldwyn to freelance. Either she was unhappy with the role she was getting at Goldwyn, or she just wanted more opportunities at new and different places. I'm not sure. It could have also been that she seemed to be on an unstoppable winning streak of making hits at Goldwyn, and Reno kind of put a halt to that. We also know that Helene was making $2,000 a week at the height of her stardom at Goldwyn. Either way, she was on her own now. and had a significant amount of success and still got a lot of buzz in movie magazines over the next few years. In 1924, she had a success with the Masked Dancer at Eastern Productions. In 1925, she got good notices in the recreation of Brian Kent and The Golden Cocoon at Warner Brothers. In 1926, she got good notices for two surviving films, both at small studios. Wise Guys Prefer Brunettes, a short comedy directed by Stan Laurel and produced by Hal Roach that saw her as a college dress shop owner that helps her boyfriend reinvigorate and loosen up a crotchety old dean played by James Finlayson. She also starred in the great drama Dancing Days for B.P. Schulberg's Preferred Pictures, where Clara Bow had also been working before it got absorbed into Paramount. In this film, she played a woman that refuses to give up her husband to his mistress. Film Daily called her performance very pleasing and made an interesting observation, that she had slowed down making films recently. The reviewer is correct. Helene made far less films in 1925 and 1926 than she had done in previous years. But in 1927, Helene signed with Columbia, which at that time was not yet a major motion picture studio. Motion Picture Magazine mentioned her in an article in 1927 alongside Mae Bush and Betty Compton as former highly paid stars at major studios that are now making less money at smaller studios like Columbia. Nevertheless, Helene persevered and started 8 more silents over the next few years. Memorable ones included Stage Kisses in 1927, in which she played a young actress whose mother-in-law threatens her and her husband, Kenneth Harlan's, happiness. The Bachelor's Baby, also from 1927, which was a comedy co-starring Harry Myers. Say It With Sables from 1928, in which she starred with Frances X. Bushman and Margaret Livingston. Women Who Dare, also from 1928, which got her rave reviews as a woman that goes to work with the poor in a rundown hospital. And Modern Mothers, also from 28, in which she starred as the mother of a young daughter, Barbara Kent, that wins the admiration of her daughter's sweetheart, played by Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Following this film, which was released in May of 1928, Helene took some time off from the movies, with one source stating that she began a vaudeville tour for about a year. When that tour ended, Helene was ready to make her Talkie debut, which she did, starring in 1929's Father and Son alongside Jack Holt at Columbia. Motion Picture News gave Helene's performance excellent reviews. Helene then took another year off from the movies, perhaps to continue her vaudeville tour, and returned to Paramount to co-star with Hal Skelly and Doris Hill in Men Are Like That in 1930, a sound remake of The Show-Off, which the studio previously made as a silent in 1926. Helene starred in the role of Clara, previously played by Louise Brooks, and while the film itself got mixed reviews, critics praised Helene's performance again. Photoplay wrote, "Helene Chadwick is enjoying her first job in a big studio in 4 years. Hello, Helene, we're glad you're back. The Talkies did it. Where was the mic all of Helene's life?" Essentially, this critic is praising Helene and her voice and is glad that the Talkies brought her back to a leading role at a major studio for the first time since 1926. Unfortunately, Men Are Like That was not a hit critically or commercially and did little to help with Helene's career. Photoplay profiled Helene alongside a few other silent film stars, including Leah Baird in late 1930, and stated that these actresses no longer demand leading roles and are willing to work for less than their former salaries. These players, however, do not accept bits. Apparently, Helene and several of her other silent film star contemporaries were now having to sadly take a huge pay cut and put themselves out there for auditions again in a town where they once reigned supreme. But Helene seems to have enjoyed acting and working, so she carried on for the next 4 years in small character parts that were usually uncredited, but were always memorable and well done. Some memorable appearances include playing Slim Somerville's wife in the Sidney Fox, Conrad Nagel, Humphrey Bogart, and Betty Davis movie Bad Sister in 1931, playing a secretary that overhears her doctor boss stand up against faulty hospital procedures and winds up getting murdered, her boss that is, an emergency call in 1933, playing another nurse that becomes a victim of another crime in 1935's Another Face, and starring as Shirley Temple and Junior Coughlin's mother in the comedy shorts Merrily Yours and Managed Money, released in 1933 and 1934, respectively. While her roles may have been small, Helene was still noticed and appreciated by her fans and the critics that once praised her star-making performances. In 1934, one fan wrote to Photoplay, "Why do the movies spend millions of dollars searching for new talent when so many actors and actresses of bygone days are waiting eagerly to make comebacks? It's been good recently to see Charles Ray, William Farnham, Helene Chadwick, and Monty Blue on the screen again, even if the roles have been small. Surely genius that burns so bright cannot be dimmed by time." Sadly, in 1936, Helene began having to accept bit parts to make ends meet. In the 1936 Bing Crosby film Pennies from Heaven, she was a woman being spoken to by her husband and you only see the back of her head. In 1937's A Star is Born, she fortunately had one line, a memorable one, comparing herself to Janet Gaynor's Vicki Lester after seeing her on the screen. Coincidentally, William Wellman, Helene's ex-husband, was the film's director, and the couple had sort of a Star is Born relationship themselves, but more on that in a second. Sadly, A Star is Born proved to be Helene's final film. While she apparently kept planning for a comeback in another larger starring role, it was never to be. She passed away in 1940 at the age of 42. While her obituary claimed she died from injuries resulting from a fall, her death certificate revealed that the real cause of her death was cirrhosis of the liver. Helene Chadwick's fall from grace in both her career and personal life is a real tragedy. Countless articles in the 1920s mentioned how kind, considerate, and lovely she was to each and every person she encountered. When she and Wellman married, it was she who was the big star at the time that introduced him to important folks in Hollywood, resulting in his long, successful film career as an Oscar-nominated director. In 1923, she stated that he apparently deserted her when she had to sue him for divorce. Years later, he seemed to have wanted to make up for it and gave his struggling ex-wife a memorable scene in A Star is Born. With life sadly imitating art, apparently, Helene had developed a serious drinking problem in the 1930s when her career began to crumble, while Wellman continued to score success after success. I honestly can't come to a clear conclusion on why Helene Chadwick's career faltered so badly in the 30s. She had been a huge star in the early 20s at Goldwyn, was successful freelancing in the late 1920s, and scored hits at the fledgling Columbia Pictures, probably helping them get on the road to becoming a major studio. It even made a very successful and well-received transition into starring in the Talkies. Fans continued to write in movie magazines about her even once she began making uncredited bit part appearances, asking, why don't we see more of her? The only idea I have is that she took time off from making movies so often in the late 20s and early 30s that maybe studios began to forget her value and talent, or maybe it was just a sign of the times when such talented actors like Helene, Agnes Ayres, and countless others struggle to keep their heads above water in an ever-changing industry. Either way, Helene deserved better. I wish she could have held on a little longer because I'm sure she could have found work as a popular character actor on television like Monty Blue, Nancy Carroll, and countless others did in just a few years. While the majority of her silent films are sadly lost, we at least have a few left. I suggest checking out Godless Men, Wise Guys for Brunettes, and The Fragment of Dancing Days, all on YouTube. Helene Chadwick, you are a true icon and deserve to be a star well into the talkies. Thank you for being such a talented and kind person. As your fan once wrote to Photoplay, genius that burns so bright cannot be dimmed by time. You will never be forgotten. Please like and subscribe or follow this account if you want to learn more about the history of silent film stars whose stardom lasted only briefly in the talkies. Up next, join me as I cover the silent to talkie career of Hallam Cooley. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great rest of your week.